All right, let's dive in. Today, we're tackling something huge, an idea that challenges nearly 1,700 years of Christian doctrine, the Trinity. The source material for this explainer makes a pretty provocative claim that what we think of as core theology was actually shaped just as much by raw politics as by prayer. So, yeah, let's get into it.
So where do we even begin? Well, the paper we're digging into kicks things off with a really basic but absolutely massive question. How did the very first followers of Jesus, the people in the first couple of generations, actually see his relationship with God the Father? Was he fully God? Was he something different? This is the core mystery we're going to unravel.
Now, if you ask most Christians today, you'll get the standard answer, the one that's been the bedrock of orthodoxy forever. It comes straight from the Nicene Creed. And it all hinges on this one powerful Greek word, homousios. It means of one substance, or of the same essence. In other words, the Son is co-equal, co-eternal, and fully God, right alongside the Father.
Okay, but here's the bombshell from the paper we're looking at. It argues that for the first few hundred years of Christianity, that Nicene view, it wasn't the main one, not even close. It claims a totally different perspective was the dominant belief, and the shift, well, that had a lot to do with power.
So to really get where this argument is coming from, we have to rewind the clock, way back, actually even before Christianity, to a powerful idea floating around in Jewish philosophy. This idea, the paper argues, became the intellectual framework for how the first Christians thought about Jesus.
And that concept is the logos. You've probably heard the term. In Greek, it means word or reason. Thinkers like the Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria saw the logos as a divine being, for sure, but a subordinate one, an intermediary who could bridge the impossible gap between a perfect, untouchable God and our messy, material world.
The paper calls this a three-tiered reality, and you can see it laid out right here. It's like a ladder. At the very top, you've got the Most High God, totally uncreated, can't be changed. Then, one step down, you have the Logos, his firstborn, sometimes even called a second God. And then at the bottom, there's everything else, all of creation, which was made through the Logos. It's a very clear pecking order.
And check out this quote from Philo himself, who was writing, right around the time of Jesus. He described the Logos as being in the midst. It's not uncreated like God, but it's not created like you and me either. It occupies this unique in-between space. And the paper's point is that this was the intellectual lens early Christians were using when they read texts like the Gospel of John.
So you can probably see where this is going, right? This Logos theology doesn't just stay a neat philosophical idea. It sets the stage for an all-out theological war. And the man at the center of this firestorm is a priest from Alexandria named Arius. His teachings are going to force the entire Christian world to pick a side. You can see how Arius's ideas are basically a logical extension of that older Logos philosophy. He argued that, look, only the Father is truly eternal, without a beginning. That means the Son, the Logos, had to be the Father's very first production, an act of his will. And if that's true, you have to arrive at the knockout punch. There was a time when he was not. He simply can't be made of the exact same divine stuff as the Father.
This chart really breaks down the two opposing sides. For Arius, the Son is a contingent being. He exists because the Father chose for him to exist. For the Nicene camp, led by a guy named Athanasius, the Son is a necessary being. He eternally pours forth from the Father's own nature, like light from a star. It's the difference between being of like substance versus the same substance. And believe it or not, one of the biggest fights in church history really came down to a single letter in a Greek word.
Now, this wasn't just some dusty debate for scholars. No way. This argument got so big, so heated, that it actually started to threaten the unity of the Roman Empire. And when that happens, the big guy himself decides he needs to step in.
Yep, the emperor. In the year 325, Emperor Constantine summons hundreds of bishops from all over the map to the city of Nicaea. His goal was pretty simple. Fix this, settle the Arian controversy, and hammer out one single unified creed for the whole church. This is the moment where politics and theology officially smash into each other.
But here's another major twist from our source. The actual breakdown of who believed what at Nicaea, it's not what you'd expect. The paper argues that the hardcore pro-Nicene bishops were a tiny, committed minority. The Arians were also a small group. The biggest faction by far was this middle majority, bishops who held to that older subordinationist view and were really uncomfortable with both of the extreme positions.
So, wait a minute.
If the Nicene supporters were in the minority, how on earth did they win? Well, the paper's answer is pretty stark. It wasn't a theological victory, it was a political one. It argues that Emperor Constantine needed a clean, unified result to keep his empire stable, and he pushed hard for the Nicene formula to get it. The need for imperial unity, the paper claims, overruled what most of the bishops in the room actually believed. Okay, so let's put the messy history on pause for a second. The paper also takes a hard look at the philosophy behind the Nicene position. It asks a really basic question. Is the final formula actually, logically coherent? To try and explain their view of a son who is just as eternal and divine as the Father, Nicene theologians like Athanasius used this really powerful analogy. They said the Son is to the Father as radiance is to the sun. And that kind of makes sense, right? You can't have the sun without its light. The light just flows from the sun's very being, necessarily and eternally.
But, and this is the paper's big critique, just think about that for a second. Is radiance a person? No, of course not. It's an impersonal quality, an energy. So the paper argues, if you take that analogy seriously, you risk turning the sun into just a mere attribute of the Father, not a distinct person with his own mind and will.
And the critique goes even deeper with another question. Does the sun choose to radiate? Nope, it just does. It has to. It's part of its nature. So again, if the sun is like radiance, it implies his existence is just an automatic byproduct of the Father's nature, not an act of divine love or will. That seems to clash with the whole idea of the Father sending the Son, doesn't it? Ultimately, the paper concludes that this analogy, and frankly, any analogy you try to come up with for the Trinity, just breaks down. And it argues this isn't just a failure of our imagination. It might actually point to a deep, fundamental logical tension in the Nicene formula itself, this idea of three distinct persons being one simple, undivided being. Okay, so let's pull all these different threads back together. What does this all add up to? Let's look at the alternative history and the final thesis that this paper is presenting. This timeline really lays out the whole counter-history in one shot. It starts around 50 CE, when the Logos concept is already out there. A century later, it's pretty much the standard model for Christian thinkers. Then comes the watershed moment in 325 at Nicaea, where a minority view gets enforced from the top down. And by 381 at the Council of Constantinople, that view is cemented as official, non-negotiable orthodoxy. So here it is, the paper's final thesis in a nutshell. First, the subordinationist view isn't just some fringe idea. It was the historical mainstream before the 4th century, and it works with the scripture. Second, it's arguably more logically straightforward. And finally, the most controversial claim, that the Nicene orthodoxy we have today wasn't some inevitable theological conclusion, but was ultimately an outcome enforced by political power. And that brings us to the final, really provocative question this whole analysis leaves us with. It forces us to ask, was the foundational creed of a global faith the result of careful biblical study, or was it shaped, maybe even decisively, by the political needs of a Roman emperor? It's a challenging thought that really makes you look at how history gets written.